Hey there, it's Silver. So this is the demo for Battle Shapers. I actually wanted to check this out because I'd heard that the demo had a fairly large amount of content for like a quick demo. And this is something that I've been pretty excited about just because I think it looks really neat. And after trying it out for a while and beating the boss a couple of times and all that stuff, I can say that I'm definitely on board for this one. So what exactly is it? Well, it is an FPS, a roguelite FPS, and stop if this sounds familiar. You choose a sort of robot overlord to fight that has their own level with their own music and enemies, and you get their powers when you beat them. So yeah, this is sort of like an FPS with some Mega Man influence, which I personally think is very cool because we don't really see that sort of thing very often. So that is what it interested me initially, was that it seemed to be an FPS roguelite that was different in a lot of ways and was doing things that were unusual for the genre. Now, the demo itself has one boss that you can face, as well as, of course, their level, the tower that leads up to them, and several different weapons and upgrades and things for you to choose from, as well as a couple of cores. So let's talk about the core system, because that's something that this game does very differently for sure, and is probably one of the coolest aspects of it. So when you begin your run, you'll be able to choose two different cores that you'll equip yourself with, a primary and a secondary. And this determines pretty much everything about how you play. So instead of choosing different characters or different classes, this is the sort of replacement for that. They also define how you look, which is a pretty nice touch. Your big left arm and stuff will look a bit different depending on which core you have equipped. But your primary core will determine what sort of active skills that you get, as well as some other passive benefits and things. And your secondary core is entirely passive, but each core can be equipped in each slot. So there aren't any that are specific to one slot. They all have active and passive skills depending on where you put them. And like I mentioned, your primary core is the big one because that's what's going to determine all of your various skills and things and basically define your playstyle. You could consider it like a class. And they're all very different as well. There are only a couple available in the demo, but they're both entirely different from each other in terms of how they play, which is pretty neat. So your core will determine the sort of special ability that you have on Q, the Q key, as well as your punch, what your punch does on the right click, and a dash. You have some sort of dash or evasive or defensive skill that the core will also determine. And this is the whole Mega Man aspect of the game in terms of getting bosses' powers, because when you defeat a boss, you get their core, and you can equip it and gain some of the things that they could do. And the way that it seems to work, I'm not 100% sure about this because it's just a demo, but from what I gather, it looks like when you first beat a boss and get its core, it's going to be a broken core, which you can only equip in the secondary slot. But if you defeat the boss again, you'll get pieces of it and you can eventually repair it and fully form the core, and then you can equip it in primary or secondary. At least that's how it looks like it's going to work. So I think this is to probably give you more of a reason to refight bosses so you can upgrade their cores. So the two you have access to in the demo right now, one of them is entirely defensively based, basically. It makes it to where your punch actually deflects enemy bullets, which is very satisfying. Any sort of parrying or deflection mechanic in an FPS is always a lot of fun, so I always appreciate the ability to send enemies' attacks back at them. So yeah, your punch, as well as doing a good amount of damage, also deflects enemy bullets. You also get an outburst on the Q key, which is like a radial deflect. Instead of only deflecting where you're facing, like your punch, it deflects everything all around you in a 360-degree sort of dome, and it also can stun enemies and stuff, as well as, importantly, it triggers your shield break effects without actually having to break your shield. You can get upgrades like whenever your shield breaks, you're invincible for 3 seconds, for instance, which turns this outburst into something very powerful because it becomes like a situational invincibility button, basically, and there are, of course, other effects like that as well. So yeah, it's pretty cool, and you also just get a simple dash. It is nothing special, but it is very reliable. It goes very far, like surprisingly far for a dash, and it can even be used in midair. The other core, which I'm not very good with, is a lot more offensively based, and it changes your dash into a dash attack. It doesn't go as far, but you swipe your claw at the end of it and actually smack enemies for a good amount of damage, and also you gain a charge. And once you have 3 charges, you can use your Q skill to sort of float in the air, and it turns you into like a judgment cut, basically, where you can use your dash 3 times, one for each of the charges you have gathered, and you'll dash through enemies and slash them up, and then once you do all 3, the ability will end and all the slashes will damage enemies at once. So everyone kind of floats in the air for a second, then you dash a bunch of times through a crowd of enemies, and then they all take damage simultaneously. So this is the sort of core if you want like a very fast, aggressive playstyle that's very offensively based. And the other thing about these cores is that you're not only choosing the skills that you'll have, but you're also choosing the various upgrade paths that you'll be able to find. Because occasionally you'll find these core enhancements, these glowing orbs, and these will give you a choice of 3 different upgrades, and the first 2 upgrades are based on your primary core, and the third is based on your secondary. So every core not only has its own active and passive benefits, but it also has a sort of arsenal of possible upgrades that you could find every time you pick up one of these enhancement cores. So this means choosing a core isn't only choosing a class, a playstyle, but it's also choosing the other ways that you can evolve that playstyle as you adventure through the various towers. So what about the towers? Well, even though there's only one available in the demo, it does give you a really good idea of how it's going to work. You choose a boss, and then you go to their tower, and their tower has its own themes and hazards and things that you're going to have to deal with, each one being different. And each boss also has a selection of different powers that they can send at you as you're climbing their tower towards them. So they aren't just a boss fight, they also like trash talk you the entire time you're going through their tower, and they can send other nasty things at you to hinder your progress. So you're not only seeing them as a boss, they're a sort of villainous overlord that lords over this whole tower and makes it more difficult for you. And they include some pretty neat stuff, like for instance, the Volt Colossus, the boss that's available in the demo, can do stuff like spawning these buffing orbs that fly around the place randomly, and they like drastically buff the enemy's defenses when they get near them, so you basically have to take out the orb first, and it can make a relatively easy room a lot more difficult all of a sudden, because suddenly now you can't damage the enemies very much and you have to focus on something else. They may also, for instance, just summon a whole bunch, like several dozen mines, these electrical mines, throughout the battlefield, and make the room significantly more hazardous all of a sudden because you have to watch where you're traveling so you don't get shocked. This is a pretty cool concept overall because it means each tower is going to be very different, and they're all going to have their own sort of theme and their own hazards that you have to overcome. And the way it sounds like it's going to work is that after you beat a boss, the remaining ones are actually going to get stronger for that playthrough. So the different hazards and powers they have are actually going to be upgraded and possibly even add new ones and stuff. So the order that you tackle them is actually going to matter because it seems like victories are going to actually increase the difficulty. As for what else you have aside from your powers, you have 2 weapon slots. You can equip any weapon in either slot. They're not like specific or anything. You'll start with just a basic pistol, but you can find all sorts of other weapons around the place. Every chamber that you beat will have some sort of reward. It could be a core enhancer, it could be a new weapon, it could be a new gadget that goes on your E key, like a grenade or something like that. There are various different rewards that you could have, but the weapons are pretty neat because they're all a little bit odd. They have various elemental effects as well as some that are just pure like kinetic damage. They're more reliable but also don't trigger any elemental effects, and you've got some really fun stuff, like for instance a sort of swarm rocket launcher that fires air-bursting sound waves kind of, or for instance a plasma carbine that it is really good for like single target damage because if you focus on one target with it, it will start to do multiplied damage to them. The weapons are the other high point in the game for me aside from the core system because they're all sort of odd and they have really cool weapon models that you'll see on the side of the screen. They just look really neat. They're a little large, but I think their size fits the overall aesthetic of the game, being this sort of like very saturated sci-fi environment. I think they look really cool, and their reload animations are also really neat and often pretty inventive. The weapons themselves just look cool. And you'll also notice that weapons have infinite ammo in this game. You do have to reload them, but you don't have like an ammo pool or anything that you're pulling from, so you can feel free to shoot to your heart's content. There's also the punch, which is important because it actually factors into the main gameplay loop of keeping yourself shielded, because you have a shield that goes above your health gauge, and in this game, when you defeat an enemy, sometimes instead of just blowing up, they'll go down into sort of like a glory kill stance, and you can use your punch to immediately execute them. Doing this is really fun and very satisfying because it actually sends the enemy flying, and you can actually punch them into other enemies and they'll damage them, which is cool. But also, when you execute an enemy like this, you'll get a bunch of shield power-ups. And this is important because healing in this game is relatively rare, but shield is not. So you're encouraged to be fast, dodge all the enemy projectiles, and execute every enemy you can to constantly keep your shield topped up because it's much easier to get more shield with these execution moves and stuff than it is to heal yourself if you take health damage because your shield was depleted. So you're sort of jetting all over the place trying to execute enemies as efficiently as possible and not miss too often because of course all the enemies do have projectile based attacks as well, so you got to look at you're angling versus theirs. You're very mobile in this game. You're kind of jumping all over the place. You don't have like a wall run or a vault or a double jump or anything like that, but you do have a very sort of floaty jump that gives you a lot of air control, and you also have, of course, the dash, which you can use in the air or on the ground, so you're definitely mobile. There's also a meta progression system, as is standard for the genre. You'll get these purple cubes from around the place. Usually you get them from executing enemies, but you can also find them in chests and some other things rarely. These you bring back to the hub area once you die or complete a run, and you can use them to unlock various permanent upgrades for yourself. So you've got the standard ones like more health and more shield, but you've also got a lot of blueprints for like new weapons that you'll be able to find, as well as new gadgets and some other things like that, and some more exotic stuff later on. And it seems to be based around these ciphers, which are basically blueprints, and you'll find different ciphers from different worlds and different enemies and things, and once you gather a cipher, you can bring it back and unlock a new upgrade for you to actually put your meta currency into. So it seems like you're going to be encouraged to do a lot of exploration and a lot of like high variety content in order to find as many ciphers as possible to give yourself a wider array of stuff to find in general. Overall, I think Battle Shapers is a really, really competently designed roguelite FPS. It's the genre of roguelite is something that is kind of difficult to translate to an FPS very well. There are only a couple that I can think of that really do a great job. Games like Ziggurat and Ziggurat 2, for instance, do a really good job. Games like Deadlink are also very good at it, but it seems like the mechanical set that a roguelite demands doesn't always work super well in an FPS, so when one comes around that's this well designed and this enjoyable and its gameplay loop is this satisfying, I definitely take notice immediately. So I'm very excited to see what happens with Battle Shapers in the full version, and I'm most definitely going to be covering it when it comes around. So the cool thing about this is when you check the link down below in the description of this video to the Steam store page that I always put, you can just play the demo yourself right now. It's available for you to download for free and try out and see what you think. So thank you guys very much for watching. Do enjoy that demo, and I'll see you next time.